Hey everyone, Alex Reed here, and welcome to this third episode of these tutorials for Ghost. Today we're going to talk about modulation, so let's start. First of all, we have to define the concept of modulation, and it's very simple. Modulation means changing a parameter over time. The goal of modulation is that that change of a parameter also changes the sound over time. The most common modulator ever is the amplitude envelope, which you can find on envelope 1 here on Ghost. Here the parameter that changes through time is amplitude or gain, or you can even call it volume if you want to keep it simple. The best part is that in a synth like Ghost is very visual too. When you press a key, you see a dot moving from left to right. The horizontal value is time and the vertical value is amplitude. If you go to the bottom, you have basically 0, and if you go to the top, you have the maximum possible value. For instance, right now, if we press a key, the sound is going to be constant. But if we change the shape to be like this, now we have a more plucky kind of sound. You can see at the bottom that it says 500 milliseconds and then 1 second. You can zoom in or out. And now you can infer that with this shape, you go from the highest possible value for the volume to 0 in this amount of time. Now you can change the shape by moving around these dots or by changing these knobs at the bottom. The tag is the time it takes to go from 0 to the maximum possible value. The sustain is the value that you will, sustain as long as you're pressing a key. When we made the plucky sound, we decreased the sustain. And because of that, the decay is the time between the attack and the sustain point. Finally, the release is how long it takes to go back to 0 once you stop pressing a key. Now, a synth like Ghost also have this hold parameter. The difference between hold and sustain is that hold is the time between the attack and the start of the decay. In other words, it lets you set a time to stay on the maximum value. Finally, the delay is, a delay for the start of the attack stage, meaning how much time the value is going to be at the bottom before starting the envelope. Now, to use this as a modulator means that any parameter on the screen can have this same movement. The way it works here on Ghost is by dragging and dropping. For instance, let's apply FM over oscillator A with oscillator B. But let's control the amount of that FM with this same amplitude envelope. Now we have a small wheel on that parameter, and that will let you choose which value is going to be the maximum possible value. Now Ghost have more than one envelope, so you can use a different envelope that's not wired to the amplitude to control the same value. That way the volume of your sound is different from the movement of the FM in this example. Not only that, we have a third envelope, a fourth, even a fifth and sixth. This is very useful because, for instance, you want to keep this plucky FM sound, but then you want a tail that starts increasing a distortion. So you have an initial pluck, and then gradually you start introducing more harmonics. So we can add more attack to envelope 3 and use that to modulate the distortion drive for oscillator A. Now the second modulator, also one of the most common ones in any synthesizer, is the LFO. That stands for low frequency oscillator. This is because usually LFOs are set below 20 Hz. It's not something you can hear, and it's perfect to use it for noticeable changes and movement. For instance, let's set this oscillator as a sawtooth wave and use the LFO to control the cutoff point of the filter. As with the envelope, you can clearly see the movement thanks to the LFO visualizer, and you can also see it right there on the filter, and also you can hear it. Now, the great thing about Ghost is that this is more than an LFO, because on most synthesizers, the LFO has a set shape. But here on Ghost, you can actually create your own shapes. You just have to double click and you will create a new node. Not only that, if you press Alt, you can snap these nodes to the grid, and you can change the amount of lines for the grid right here at the top right. By default, the LFO is set on bits. That means that it will be synced to your project. But you can also set it to be on hertz. When you set it on hertz, you can go even beyond 20 hertz, meaning that you will get audio rate modulation. For instance, if we now modulate the phase of an oscillator, we will get phase modulation, which is FM in this case. If you want the LFO to go both ways from the position of the parameter, you have to right click on the modulation and select toggle polarity. It's not a musical FM because it's on a set frequency. If you want to go audio rate, you actually can, and that's another great feature on Ghost. We have this little piano icon right here, and when we press it, we can actually set the rate on semitones. That means that now the speed is going to correspond to the hertz of the notes you're pressing. So as we are modulating the phase of an oscillator, we actually have FM on the style of DX7 or Ghost, which is going to sound musical, and that means that now we have up to 6 different oscillators that we could use besides the ones that are proper oscillators of the FM engine. Also keep in mind you can create any shape you want, meaning that the FM is going to get crazier. But let's go back to simpler modulation. That means making it slower. Let's keep it on beats. At the left, we have 2 options. One is retrigger. That means that every time a new note is pressed, the LFO is going to reset to the far left, which is the starting point. And the other is the loop. When you disable it, this LFO will behave like an envelope. The difference is that the sustain is always going to be the last note. The other parameter is the amount, which is great when you have many different parameters being modulated by an LFO, and you don't want to decrease each one separately, you want to decrease everything at the same time. Now, there are a couple more great features right here on the LFO. You can see that you have different presets for different shapes, and not only that, you can save your own. Many of these presets are actually rhythmic kind of movement. This is very useful to create many rhythmic effects, from your basic sidechain type of sound to something more complex, well, like this. Finally, with the right click, we have different options. The most interesting ones are randomizing the shape or randomizing a sequence. And also to set this shape as the shape of oscillator A. So for instance, let's create a random shape, and now let's set it to be oscillator A. You see that the shape on oscillator A is the same. Not only that, remember that Ghost is a wavetable synthesizer. So the other option is to add the LFO as a frame. Let's create another shape, let's add it as a frame, and now let's change this wave parameter so we can change to the other frame. If we keep the morph on, the movement is going to be smoother, giving us a better wavetable action. Honestly, this is one of my favorite features because the LFO is also a wavetable designer. Now, with the envelope and the LFO, I think that we have a lot of information for today. So in the next episode, we are going to check out the other modulators. But still, for now, you have plenty to play around with crazy kind of sounds, so have fun.